to the podcast, and thank you for taking the time to listen. I got a very special guest today. He's a successful businessman, an Air Force veteran, an author, and he also happens to be my dad. But this episode is obviously going to be a little bit different than a lot of the previous episodes because I've interviewed a lot of musicians. But I have had a few authors on, and I plan to have more on. So this is really just a preview of things to come. But today's episode especially will be a big departure, and we're going to get into some heavy topics with author Rodger Shute. His book is called Ultimate Reality, and explores some very deep questions like, where do we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going in this afterlife? And ultimate reality, it means basically that there is more to the world than meets the eye. We can only see so much right here in this present reality. So for this book and this interview, first and foremost, you have to have an open mind, because we're going to be talking about, what is this ultimate reality, how it manifests itself, as well as things that they seem like coincidences, but they may be signs of this ultimate reality. And we're going to talk about the misconceptions of evolutionary theory. We're going to get into consciousness and how deep that goes, as well as altered states of consciousness, and finally death and what happens after death. My dad has done a lot of research on this subject, 496 sources he's used. So this is not just some made up theory. He's quoting philosophers, psychologists, medical doctors, physicists, and much more. So I found it fascinating. But again, I do warn you, you got to go into this episode with an open mind. So I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Rodger Shute, to the Chuck Shute podcast. It's weird. I don't know if people notice, but we have the same last name.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that a
coincidence.
synchronicity?
No, I don't want to try to fool people, but yes, you are my dad, but you are also a brilliant author. And so we'll get into the book you've written here. It's called Ultimate Reality. And we will get into that in a little bit, but I do want to hear a little bit about your background. I want people to hear that because I think your story is interesting and it kind of helps explain how you got into these topics and the kind of the basis for your book in some ways.
My dad died when I was 13, but he walked out of the house to go hunting, and that was the last I saw of him. And then the morning of my sister's birthday, her 11th birthday, my mother woke me up and told me that my father was dead. And the way I relate this to the book is titled Ultimate Reality, and I talk about it, the door of perception, kind of a barricade, if you will, a veil, if you will. And that event to me was an eye opener, because my dad was not there anymore in the perceptual world, and I felt like I'd smacked right up against this door of perception.
But
he was somewhere, but he wasn't here.
Yeah, but wasn't he kind of not there anyways? Like, your parents you grew up in a dysfunctional family. Your dad was an alcoholic, and then it was interesting because your mom was not an alcoholic, but then when your dad died, then your mom became an alcoholic. So you just had that constantly running through your whole family for your whole childhood. And it was very dysfunctional, right?
Yeah, you don't realize, when you're living it. And I suppose a lot of people that come out of an environment like that don't realize how dysfunctional it is till you run into somebody like your mother.
Yeah.
Who has a very functional,
a normal.
A normal.
Because to you, that was normal. Chaos and
normal.
Running around and people being drunk and passing out and just in poverty. I mean, wasn't your mom on welfare? I mean, it was not a very pretty picture.
No, it wasn't. But, that's, and I don't mean to harp on that too much. But the thing was, I was a very precocious child, and I had a lot of interests, and I was very curious about a lot of things. And that was not encouraged in the household, because neither my mother or father had any experience with children. And they really didn't recognize what I consider to be my gifts. I was venting things, writing stories, coloring.
Did you read a lot
things.
as a kid?
I did. I read a lot as a child, and none of that was encouraged. And so let's skip from, my dad's death, which had a traumatic effect on me, because I then realized that there was not a Santa Claus. And I put it in that kind of a term because before you first experience a death, everything's just like, the sun's coming up, it rains, it's cloudy, it's sunny, Christmas comes, Easter's, all of a sudden you realize, like, what the heck are the rules for this thing called life? This doesn't make any sense to me.
And then you said that when you were in the military, And you were
So I
doing,
was in the military.
yeah, you're in the
I was in the
military,
Philip-
in the Air Force, and you're doing military police. And that gave you a lot of downtime to kind of think. And that's when you kind of started thinking more about this kind of stuff, about the deeper meaning of life and all that, right?
Yeah, let's go to the military. I was in the jungles in the Philippines. Um, you'd be there in the middle of the night, working the midnight to 8 o'clock shift, and as long as nobody was trying to sneak into and do anything terrible,
Yeah. You still
you
had a
did have a
job to
lot of
do.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had a lot of time to. And I came up with all these theories, and I thought, I didn't understand. I never heard the word philosophy. It wasn't taught in the high school that I was in, and so I didn't realize that there's a whole genre of thinking under this title of philosophy. And that didn't dawn on me until I came back from the service, went to school on the GI Bill. First quarter I took in school, philosophy professor, Dr. Devon Edrington, he told us the first day of school, he said, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in this class. And at the end of the class, if you can understand, at the end of the term, if you can understand what I believe, what I think, then I failed. So he didn't want to tell us this is the way it is. Repeat it back to me.
Right.
He said, you come up with your own ideas, you write a defense of it. And if you can successfully do that, you're going to get a good grade. So we did come to the end of the quarter, and I thought, okay, I'm moving on. I'm going to another class. Please tell me what you think.
Yeah. Did he ever tell you?
He wouldn't do it even then. So,
what's interesting? Yeah. I was just going to say, go ahead. I was just going to say, it was another interesting thing that you told me before about school and college, how driven you were. I don't know where this drive came from, but you told me that you were so driven, you wanted straight A's in every class, and that you would go up to your professors and you'd say, how do I get an A? And they would say, I haven't given an A in 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it may be. And you're like, well, I'm getting an A, so how do I do it? And you'd find a way. They would give you all this extra work to do, and you would get an A.
Yeah, I got an A in every class.
And you graduated valedictorian.
Yeah,
University of Washington.
Summa cum laude, and I was, I guess, invited into Phi Beta Kappa. I didn't even know about that, but I got a letter in the mail, and so I looked up later. You had to be recommended for Phi Beta Kappa by a professor, and I never found out who recommended me. But I'm a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and so I got the straight A's, and I was driven because it started off. I was really curious, just like I said. And I was able to take that curiosity and channel it into school. And I found most of the classes I took, I had a double major in philosophy and accounting.
Right.
And I had to make a decision at one point, am I going to be a philosopher, unemployed, or am I going to be an accountant? And I chose to do the accounting, but I took enough philosophy classes to qualify for Phi Beta Kappa because it's a liberal arts organization.
So then at that point, philosophy was more kind of just a hobby. Like you're reading books on the side as kind of just in your spare time.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of spare time, as you know, because started a CPA firm, which is still in existence today. And then later started an investment advisory firm to service the clients of the CPA firm. So running two companies at the same time didn't leave a lot of extra time. But as soon as I was able to, I began to, spend more and more time on the thing that really interested me, that I thought was the important thing to do with my life. And in doing that, I wound up first went to graduate school in archaeology at the University of Leicester in Northern England, and was working on a proposal for a doctorate degree. And it was approved by my professor, but the school wouldn't allow me to be admitted to the doctoral program because they had changed the requirement. You had to work in the field of archaeology. That was not one thing I wanted to do. I'm kind of the guy that Indiana Jones says, most of the work is done in the library.
You want to be in the library.
You want to be in the library, and that's where I wanted to be.
But before that, wait, can we back up though? So like you said, you had the accounting firm and the financial advising, and you were very successful. I think, I know you want to be humble, but you're very successful with both these things, but this was not your true passion. This is interesting to me because I interview a lot of musicians and they love music, and some of them are successful, some of them not, varying degrees, but you were very successful at something that really wasn't your passion. How did you find success in that field when that really wasn't even your number one most favorite passion?
Well, I get passionate about anything I do. So the thing is, just like I did in school and getting A's in classes that weren't necessarily interesting to me,
Yeah.
because my passion was to do the most excellent
To
work
get
I could
success,
do,
to be successful or to win or.
just to realize my potential, to
Okay.
go as far as I could. I could never find the way to rationalize to myself that it was somebody else's fault that I didn't do well. And, I heard that a lot in school. People say, well, the professor's an asshole and, he did all this stuff. And that's why, and I always thought, I got to put it on me. So I don't get the grade. It's on me. It's not on the professor.
Well,
So,
and especially when you have a business, who are you going to blame then? Your partner?
yeah.
I guess.
And the thing is, once you take on clients, and that was a professional relationship, you've got a responsibility. These people are trusting you and they're depending on you.
So you do that business, again, you're successful. You're reading about philosophy and some of this stuff in your spare time. As the kids get older, I think you have more time. And so then you retire. And this part is fascinating. And then, like you said, you get into this archaeology and stuff, but it's just fascinating that you retire from business and accounting and all this. Most people that retire, they go fishing, they go to Hawaii. You're getting advanced degrees in archaeology, philosophy, and psychology for fun. You don't need the money. You don't need to, this is just for fun. I don't know that many people that do that.
Yeah. It's almost like, I'm not sure fun is the right word. I just say that
Okay.
I just had to, because there's stuff I didn't know and I had to find out.
Okay.
What is the answer to all these questions? From the day my dad died, this is all coming back to me. What is this thing called life, and what's it all about? And so archaeology, anthropology, getting into, prehistoric civilizations was of interest to me. When that didn't pan out, I couldn't get a doctorate, which was my goal, to get a doctorate. Then I went into philosophy, and I went to the University of Wales in Lampeter, Wales, and went there several times and picked up a certificate. So I got a graduate certificate in archaeology and a graduate certificate in philosophy from the University of Wales.
Are those related somehow? Like, is your interest in archaeology, is that just totally different? Like if you're interested in sports or something, or is that somehow related to some of the themes in the book?
Well, it is because it all has to do with where do we come from? Like, that's the question. Where do we come from? What are we doing? Where do we go? And those are all fields that would investigate that. And so that was the reason that I wanted to pursue that. And actually the thesis topic I had for my archaeology doctorate was going to be on when did we first manifest consciousness, as the human species. That was going to be my endeavor. And the professor that was overseeing me approved that as a topic, because I have voluminous research that I'd done to show that I was going to structure this right. But I was shut off from pursuing the PhD, and I wanted to get a doctorate. So then I went to they said they had one at Wales, University of Wales, and then just about the time I got that certificate, the postgraduate certificate, which is all the coursework to get the doctorate, the school basically went bankrupt. It was the 2008 crisis, and public institutions, everybody was failing. And so I was kind of left like, oh, now what do I do? Then I found University of Philosophical Research in LA, which I was the last graduate of that program because of funding problems. But this was the greatest program I'd ever been in. And most of the professors that I had during that 2.5-year period were people that had written the books that were in my library. So it was just an honor for me to study under them. Yeah.
So then when did you start writing the book, and what prompted you to do that?
Well, again, when I went to the University of Wales, we met with one of my professors there at a chess club in London, your mom and I told him what my goal was, to get a doctorate. And he said, he had a doctorate, of course. And he said, don't do that. He said, you're just going to put yourself through all this agony. And I said, well, then if I'm not going to get a doctorate, I'm going to write a book. And he said, yeah, do that instead. And so when I got back and I thought, well, I need to get that master's of psychology to have a credential to write the book. And then I went on to the University of Philosophical Research in LA and got the master's of transformational psychology. And while I was doing that, of course, there was a lot of papers being written. And doing the papers was a lot of the research, the ground level research that I did, that wound up in some form being incorporated into the book.
And the book is, you also say that it's written for your kids and your grandkids to have those questions that they may have answered for your perspective, at least. So if they ever wondered, like, what did you think of this or that, they can read the book and then they'll know your thoughts on all the subject matter.
Yeah, well, so that's one thing that I was denied the luxury of, and that is ever finding out what my dad's thoughts were about this stuff.
Right.
And I thought, well, I don't want you, our children, your moms and I have children, and I don't want my grandchildren to wonder, how did Grandpa look at this? What did he think about this? So that was part of the background. But I did want to get the book done, and then I think we talked about this the first time, is that I wound up with cancer.
Yeah.
And then that
your fear was your fear of when you got cancer, your fear was not of dying. It was not being able to finish the book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When I think if people read this book seriously and study its contents, hopefully they'll come away with, they'll lose their fear of death. And
so you don't have a fear of death anymore?
Well, no, I don't. I don't have a fear of death. And I think when they read the book, it'll be obvious to them why there's just so many mysteries. And one of the things in there, I think I talked to you about this with Socrates. He was sentenced to death, and he had to take a poison. And his buddies came to him when he was awaiting them to carry out the death sentence. And they said, hey, we've got money and we can pay these people. We could spirit you out of here. And he said, you know what? Going against the law is wrong. It's evil. But he said, dying, we don't know. We don't know. That could be the greatest thing in the world. We don't know.
Yeah.
So he said, I'm choosing between doing something that I know is evil and taking the punishment, which may not be so evil. And so that's really kind of the philosophy that I have, is that, you want to lose your fear of death, or at least, have it not be monopolizing your life so that you can live a really full life.
Right. Which you have done. So, well, let's get into the book then. So it's called The Ultimate Reality. Again, I've got my copy right here. Everyone should pick it up. But it was interesting. I finished the entire book yesterday, and this was a good quote. It was actually in the afterword, but I feel like this should be at the beginning. Because it says, people have I think people have pre-misconceptions of a lot of these things. We might have already lost some listeners from some of the stuff we've said, but because I think some people either believe very strongly in a religion or they are strongly atheist, which is also, it's like both camps. Like, you really need to open up your mind for this book, because you say this book seeks to neither prove nor disprove the existence of any particular God, not the truth or falsity of any particular religion.
Yes, that's true. And the first chapter, that takes us to the first chapter, which is on belief, truth, knowledge. And that's one of the big problems in the world today. And I think you would agree with me, is that people adopt a belief and they're just entrenched. They're not going to change their belief. They don't want to know what you think. They want to tell you and convert you to their belief. And so what I suggest in the first chapter is maybe what people should do is take their beliefs and then argue with themselves the other side. They should do the research, like, why would somebody be anti-global warming when I firmly believe global warming is a reality? And find out what it is about global warming that people that don't adhere to that, what is it that they see that you don't see? And then at least you'll understand where they're coming from. You may not change your beliefs, but also, again, on the belief thing, I suggest in there that we shouldn't even have a belief in something if we don't need to take action, because once you adopt a belief, you stop assimilating new information. And that's a real problem. It's really hard to say don't have a belief in things, but if you don't need to do anything, just take the belief, just take the information in, let it sit there, take new information in. And then when you do have to take action, you'll have more information available to you to make a better decision.
Yeah. You say your goal is not to challenge your goal is to challenge beliefs, not necessarily change beliefs. And then you talk about like people being either too gullible and excessive wariness, or having excessive wariness or denial. You kind of want to be in the middle. You want to be open to new ideas, but also be skeptical. You don't want to just go, okay, I believe everything in this book, hands down, but you also don't want to say everything in this book is BS. You got to kind of be in the middle and be able to make up your own mind about it.
That's exactly right. And the whole idea of the book isn't to convince anybody one way or the other. It's to point out, hey, This is what the paradigm is, the materialist paradigm. And here's the other side of it. And the problem is that a lot of the work that's done by these people who I've drawn upon, a lot of those people were punished basically either financially or career-wise because they have these beliefs. And one of them, of course, that I mentioned in the book is Rupert Sheldrake, who wrote a book called The New Science of Life. And he's a PhD from Oxford. He's not a slacker. He's a really smart guy. And he thinks outside the box. And he wrote this book. And the editor of Nature magazine, which is one of the most respected professional magazines, looked at his book, and his conclusion was it's a book worthy of burning. This is from somebody who's supposed to have an open mind.
Yeah.
He didn't say things like, there's a lot of issues in this book that need to be investigated further. He said, no, the book should just be burned. And I was just appalled to read that. But that's an example of the closed-mindedness you run into when you think outside the box. And I think we talked about this when we were talking about this the other day, is that we have a lot of relatives that are educators, and I don't profess to know anything about teaching. But when I was a child, a young person, I think I would really have appreciated for the teachers to tell me, okay, we're going to teach you what's in the box, but then we're also going to teach you to think what could be wrong with what's in the box. Come up with some alternative ways of looking at things just to stimulate your creativity and your imagination. But Rupert Sheldrake's just one example. I use him as my poster boy because he just takes so much abuse, and he's not in it to make money. He's in it because he really believes in what he's doing, and he's got some solid foundation for his work.
Yeah, no, sounds like you. So let's talk about also what is, because people are probably wondering, what is ultimate reality? What does that mean? So your definition is it's ultimate reality, or the term hidden reality, or a divine realm. Is that also maybe, is it kind of like a fourth dimension? Like what is that? How do you describe what this is?
Well, so that's a good question. And that's the mystery. We know that there's a non-perceptual world. In the second chapter, I talk about ways in which this non-perceptual world manifests in our perceptual world through a couple of different ways. But we can't know too much about it because we're not living in it. We can't perceive it, but we can see how it manifests in our objective everyday life. So to tell you what it is, it's a hidden realm behind the world of perception. It's what Aldous Huxley referred to as behind the doors of perception. And if you ask me one thing that I do believe in, is that I believe there is this ultimate reality, because everything I've researched and looked at just points to this. And the book supports that.
And so one of the people that you mentioned, Paul Daves, who's a physicist at ASU, and he's open to the idea of a hidden or divine realm. He says there's some foundation for its existence, whether it's a God or logic or a set of laws or some other foundation for existence. He says through his scientific work, again, this is scientific, he's come to believe that the universe is put together in an ingenuity is so astonishing that he can't merely accept it as just a brute fact. In other words, it's so perfect that it couldn't have happened just by accident.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it happening you're going to get me laughing in the aisles again. You'll probably have to mute this program if you keep talking about it. But it's so ridiculous to me that somebody would say, we've got this glob of primordial goo, and we're going to mature into these people who have all these abilities and artistic abilities and sensories, and they can smell and they can see and they can touch and feel and they can feel love. And this all came from this thing of glue, and it's all by just an accident. It's just obviously Paul Davies, who I cite in there several times in the book, sees it the way I do. And that we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
We can't really say, but we know that it does.
And then you said Sheldrake and Kurtz, and then David Bohm. Is that how I say Bohm? Theoretical physicist?
David Bohm.
Bohm.
Yeah, he was at Birkbeck College, and he came.
What is a theoretical physicist? What does that mean? How did he study this?
He's not looking to employ the things in some kind of a productive capacity, making something. He's not trying to make nuclear bombs. He's exploring it from strictly a theoretical standpoint. And he was a brilliant guy, and he wrote many books, and some of them are really tough to wade through. But he made this statement. He said, particles have to be taken literally as projections of a higher dimension reality which is something that I call, the ultimate reality. And he said it can't be accounted for in terms of any force or interaction between them. I mean, it's just something that's unknown, but it's a reality.
And okay. And then another really smart guy that you mentioned several times in the book, Carl Jung, a psychologist, he talks about a couple different things. First of all, the collective unconscious, that we're all linked in some way. And, there's analytical psychology, and there's part of this world that we can't see. A realm of reality is invisible with non-material things. So he kind of believes in this phenomenon of a ultimate reality as well. And then he also talks about your whole third chapter, synchronicity, and distinguishing that from coincidence. So how do synchronicity and coincidence differ?
So that's a good question. And honestly, I think that it's difficult to define synchronicity. I know Jung does. He says it's an inner event, an outer event connected by meaning. But I look at serendipity and I look at seriality, which was a guy named Kammerer came up with that idea. And coincidence could be just this one-off thing, This happens and then something else happens. It's just a coincidence. It has no visible meaning that you can tell. When you have a bunch of events like the thing that happened with the Nixie Knox story.
Yeah. So explain that. I know you talk about this in the book, but yeah, explain the Nixie Knox thing. This is kind of your example of synchronicity.
Yeah. So the Nixie Knox story is kind of interesting because it involves you. I was working on a paper in psychology, and I took a break and I did a crossword puzzle, a New York Times crossword puzzle, which is one of my hobbies. And there was a word that I didn't understand. I mean, I got this word because I got all the words that went across. I got all the clues that went across, but I'd never seen this word before. And that word was Nixie. And I thought, what is that? So I looked it up in the dictionary, and it's a piece of misaddressed mail. It was called a Nixie, which I didn't know. So I learned something there. So then a little bit later, I was working on this psychology paper, and I ordered a book by Jung to supplement the research I'd done. And as it is with Amazon, they give you the opportunity to read it before you get the book. And so they sent me the pages on a Kindle, and I could look at the book. And the first thing I turned to was a statement from Jung where he refers to it as it's kind of he says he calls it the feminine, the anima, as you remember from psychology classes. He means it's an instinctive version of the anima is a Nixie. And so there I go, like, well, that's really weird. I'm finding Nixie in the crossword puzzle. An hour later, I'm finding it in the psychology book I'm reading. And then that night, we were going to meet you and Dana for dinner. And when we were there, I thought, well, I got to tell this to Chuck because he's got the psychology degree and he'll really get a kick out of it. And I mentioned this word Nixie. And then your friend Dana says, they had a cat named Nixie Knox one time. And I thought, what? This is 3 times. This is too much. And so anyway, I thought no more of it. We came home and I was just kind of like blown away by it.
But
So
there's a lot of
day,
examples like that in the world that almost seems like these coincidences, like mathematically or out of like the odds of those things are very astronomical.
I think so. I mean, those kind of things definitely. And that before I finish the story, let me finish it first, I guess. So the next day, or the Sunday after we had our dinner, and I learned about the Nixie Knox. By the way, that was a Dr. Seuss book, ABC, that mentions Nixie Knox.
Right.
I guess he's not a name we can use anymore.
Is that one on the banned list? Uh-oh.
Yeah, he's on the
We're going to get canceled.
We're going to get canceled. But so on that Sunday, your mom and I went to breakfast. And as we were leaving the restaurant, there was a table family there with children. And your mom stopped to offer him a coupon we had because we were leaving to come home and we wouldn't be using the coupon. And I went out to the car, and when she came out, I said, "Oh, who are those people?" And she said, "Oh, they're really nice. They're from blah blah blah." So what was their name? And their name was Knox. And I thought, "Oh, this is a cute scam. That's a Nixie." It took me from Nixie to Nixie Knox to Knox. It was like the circle was completed. So,
but do you think there's a reason for that? Like, did you say that synchronicity might be a way of the universe or this other realm attempting to maybe communicate with us in some way?
See, now that's something I strongly suspect. I think in the Bible, there's all these signs. You read about all the signs. This sign. There was a burning bush. There was a star that did this. Well, I think in this modern day, this technological day, the way that ultimate reality communicates with us is through things like synchronicity. When things happen to you over and over and over and over and over again, it's just a sign. It's telling you that I exist. This universe exists. This ultimate reality exists. And so that's just what I suspect. Again, I don't have a firm belief in it. I'm kind of like Carl Jung. He said, I don't believe anything. I either know it or I'm still looking.
Okay. So yeah. So should we move into the next chapter here? This is one, we'll probably lose some people here, but evolution. This is so interesting to me because, I think it's interesting to everybody, and it should be something that we always discuss and talk about. And I see so many of these debates on evolution on Facebook, which it seems like a great place to talk about it. But people seem so sure of themselves, and they've never read Darwin's book. Now you've actually, I haven't read his book, so I don't know if I have a strong opinion on this one or the other, or a strong belief, but you've read the book, Origin of Species. And even you say that in his book, even Darwin himself points out flaws with the theory.
Well, first of all, I read on Origin of Species long time ago, but I read it because I thought, well, that would be really good to know. Where did the species originate from?
It's probably a good,
I point out in the book,
right?
And others have pointed out, he never talks about the origin of species in the book. And the title,
which is the title, because that's what, where do things come from? Because if things evolve, they had to start with something. They can't just evolve out of nothing. And then explain this thing where it's like, he talks about a bolt of lightning comes down and strikes this, what do you call it? Primordial goo. And they tried to do these experiments in the lab, and they can't recreate it. So that's one problem with it, right?
Yeah, that's one problem with it. There's so many problems with it.
But there is some, you do believe that some species have evolved, because you talk about, what is it? Lamarckism. The offspring is born with a survival trait of the parents. Like these mice at McGill University, they were taught to, fear something, and then they had kids. The mice had the offspring, and those offspring had the same fear that their parents had.
Yeah, so there's something going on there that's not passed through the genes. And I think takes us into Sheldrake's theory of morphic resistance and the morphic field. There's something going on there. But more important than that is, the primordial goo. That's like, there's always been this argument, evolution versus intelligent design. And I try to point out in the book that those two are not, they're not opposite of each other, because evolution starts with the thing that intelligent design argues for. That is, this stuff, this primordial goo, if you will, that's a thing that starts the whole thing. And you can't argue evolution and dismiss intelligent design, because you're starting with an argument where you've got this assumption of something that you can't prove. So it's an invalid argument to maintain that evolution explains how we got here and what we're doing here. But yeah, there's things about evolution that make sense, but there's a lot of stuff about it that nobody dare challenge, especially unless they're tenured in the university.
But what about the Big Bang theory? Is that kind of how it started then, or did that have something to do with it?
Well, see, nobody knows. That's a theory they have, but the Big Bang had to, somehow be engineered. Nothing, you can't create, like you said earlier, you get right on it. You can't create something out of nothing. So where did the Big Bang come from? It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It comes from somewhere, and that's the thing that we don't know the answer to. But there's a couple of things I want to point out about this chapter that make it interesting. One is pointing out, why there's not necessarily such a divergence between intelligent design and Darwinism or neo-Darwinism. And that is, if you went to a theater and you saw a magician put a gob of goo on a table and then cover it with cloths and say a few words, and then uncover it, and there's a fully grown human being, you'd say that's magic, especially if you could see under the table and there was no way this could be a trick. You'd say it's magic. But the evolutionary guy's looking to see under the table, how did this goo turn into this guy? And we're just saying, look, the thing is magic. Forget that.
Either way, yeah.
Dude, this is magic.
Right.
And so that's how I look at it, and I propose that. And so The other thing in the evolutionary chapter is about a guy named Richard Dawkins, who's a real prime materialist, and he's a brilliant guy, evolutionary biologist, but um, he's got a closed mind. And there's two ways in which I bring this out. One is that he makes a statement that the living results of natural selection overwhelmingly impress us with the illusion of design and planning. You know, he recognizes the phenomenon, but he wants to put the label illusion on it. And the other thing that's interesting about Dawkins is he tried to prove his point by programming a computer to generate random strings of letters. And he did that, and a bunch of real words came out of this program. And so he said, he argued, well, say, look, the randomness of all these letters, stuff will be constructed. And then he forgot to realize that he had programmed the computer to do this. So kind of like, dude, this is not supporting your position at all.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, so then the next chapter, Ubiquity of Consciousness, and you talk about the 3 different theories of consciousness. So there's, I don't even know how to say this word, epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism is that, so that one says consciousness is solely just in the brain. And so that's saying like the brain can't interact with this invisible force, but you say that's false because your point is like a rock can interact with gravity, and gravity is an invisible force.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the thing is, I start off that chapter mentioning that nobody knows how to define consciousness. I mean, there's just thousands and thousands of papers and lots of books on consciousness. So you can get wrapped up in the details and listen to the philosophical arguments, some of which are profound, but that doesn't take you any closer to understanding, trying to objectify something which is inherently subjective. In other words, yeah, you can define that here's what happens. This data comes into my brain, and that's what makes me blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me love something. You know, those are not discernible in objective reality. So, I kind of go over that stuff just to prepare everybody for what's coming next in the last 2 chapters, which is altered states of consciousness and then the continuation of consciousness.
Yeah, but so the other forms of consciousness are emergentism, which the mind emerged at some point in evolutionary history, and then panphysicism, which is saying that everything has a mental aspect. So, and then you kind of go into more details about what those different things are. But this is an interesting one. The brain is kind of a filter for perception. So like the brain is actually filtering out sensory information because there's so much stuff going on. And so the examples you use are like when people take hallucinogenic drugs or they have those near-death experiences, people have these extreme moments of clarity, like where they might be taking off that filter for a minute and you can actually see some things that are actually there. Because the theory is like when you take the drugs, you're seeing things that aren't there, but maybe they're just taking the filter off and you're seeing this other ultimate reality, right?
I think that's right. I think there's just a lot of evidence that would point to the fact that when you take these mind-altering drugs, you're reducing the effectiveness of the brain as a filter. And so you're going to see things and experience things in a wholly different way. Of course, that leads us into the whole thing about near-death experiences and so on and so forth in the last chapter. But one of the quotes is, I have a geneticist in there that I quote that says that if an amoeba was a large animal, and this guy that's what he does. He studies these these really small living things like amoebas. And he said, if it was a large animal, its behavior would indicate states of pleasure, pain, hunger, desire, just as we attribute to a dog. So you can't stop when something's living at that low level and say, okay, this is where consciousness manifests in life at this level, like a dog or a cat. His point, and I put a lot of research into this, that I bring out in the book with a lot of citations. There's like 490 citations in the book. So if somebody wants to investigate further, there's plenty of sources.
So one example that you have is this kid who he literally had no brain, but he had 126 IQ. So, I mean, you can't just say that consciousness is in the brain because this kid didn't have a brain, but somehow he's still able to function.
Yeah, he was functioning at a high level. He had an IQ this is John Lorber that did this work. He was a neurophysicist. the guy had an IQ of 126, but when they in first class honors degree in math, and he was completely normal socially, and when they cut his brain open or his head open, his skull open, they found that he had almost no brain, 4.5 centimeters of brain, mostly filled with brain fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, and another guy, a neurophysicist at the Mediterranean University in Paris, had a similar experience. He found a guy that he had a lower IQ. He had about an 80 IQ, but he was employed. He had a job, he had a family, and he was doing fine. But he had virtually no brain. Well, both of these things, if you research them, and I give you references, you'll find there's a lot of criticisms of those, but there's nobody that says, "Hey, this is something we need to look into. We need to do some more investigation."
I mean, that's pretty fascinating. And then this is another example that that explains that maybe some of this stuff is not in the brain, because you point out this example of this lady who she was a lesbian, and then she got a heart transplant from somebody who was a straight person, and then she became straight, and she married a man and had kids because of this heart transplant. I mean, it would appear on the surface.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not taking a position one way or the other. I'm just presenting a lot of research. There's another lady who was she considered herself to be McDonald's biggest customer, but she had the transplant from someone who was a vegetarian. And after that transplant, she just found anything to do with meat repulsive. And so these are documented cases.
Yeah.
So
it's like they're saying memories are stored in the organs, or you're saying they're not even stored in the organs, but maybe in these invisible fields. And this goes into like quantum physics, then this gets really above my head.
Well, and I try to break it down, but the University of Arizona is currently looking at doing a study of 300 transplant cases to determine if there's any validity to this. So you got to give them credit for at least investigating. We don't know what's going to come out of that research, but dismissing it as worthy of burning is just probably the worst solution you can come up with. The University of Arizona is doing an investigation, and will someday be published what they found on that. But that's the only way that you're going to make any progress in the world, is by abandoning the paradigm that says, no, this can't be true, right, because it doesn't square with our paradigm, and do some investigation.
Right. Well, that's why, like you said, you have so many examples. So, and when you talk about the animals, you talk about how dogs have human qualities, pets have these bonds, but then at even a smaller level, the termites, you talk about this example of termites. Explain this thing with the queen and how I'll let you tell it. I probably will screw it up.
So somebody did this research with termites, and they found that there's like thousands and thousands of termites, and they're working in sync. They're doing everything, and they're constructing these elaborate nests, and they have a queen. And so the idea was, that's got to be pheromones. The queen exerts these pheromones, and that's what's directing these guys. So somebody said, well, let's see if that's true. So in a couple of different instances, in one case, they buried a big steel wall between the queen and the workers. And they found that the workers went on just as they did. Well, pheromones, they don't travel through steel. So that kind of blocked the pheromone study. So then they did another thing. They killed the queen, and they found that the workers didn't know what to do. They were totally disorganized, and everything fell apart. So there was something going on from the queen to the workers, which was not a pheromone. And when the queen was killed, the workers didn't know what to do. They went, the nest was destroyed, basically.
So might be, again, one of these other fields or other realms.
Yeah, I think that can support the idea of maybe there's something going on there from a field that circulates around the queen that is giving all this stuff, and it's goes through steel. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with steel, and but that's, again, I give a lot of authorities and references and papers cited there if someone has more interest in looking into that further. But to me, that all I'm trying to do is point out that challenge stuff when people tell you.
Yeah. And here's another example too that you give of this dissociative identity disorder, or otherwise formerly known as multiple personality disorder. So people will go into these other identities or personalities, and they'll speak different language. Medical issues will be solved. Like you give an example of a lady who had a lazy eye, and then when she was a different personality or identity, the lazy eye was gone.
Yeah. There's, and again, I start that discussion out saying, there's a lot of doctors and psychiatrists that say that phenomenon doesn't exist. And I want to point that out and be forthright. But there's some evidence given there where they've done tests to see, they can put brain tests on, they can see if the guy can speak languages that he never learned when he's got this other personality. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff. I find it really interesting. The phenomenon's interesting. What the answer to that is.
Yeah, we don't know but there's something going on.
Something going on.
Yeah. So then in chapter 6, you go into this a little bit more with the altered states of consciousness and dreams. Obviously, that's one example. But there was one quote that this was a quote that you had. If we assume that atoms have no physical properties, as Heisenberg had claimed and acknowledged that molecules are comprised of atoms, and that we in turn are comprised of molecules, do we have any physical properties? You say it's not a leap in logic to conclude that the claims of dualism may be false, but in an unexpected way. There may be no material realm at all. Like our perceptive reality may be illusory. So basically, I think the way I understand this is like we're living in the Matrix, is what you're saying. You say it's not only possible, it's highly probable.
I make that statement in the book. I quote a bunch of knowledgeable people. I'm not saying this. I don't know anything about the physics behind it, but knowledgeable physics professors and researchers have looked at the possibility we're living in a matrix, and they've said it's not only likely, it's very probable. So draw your own conclusions. You can read the papers. I've cited them in the book, but I found it to be quite fascinating. And I've also seen some programs on Joe Rogan where that subject is talked about, and some of the people that are adamant that we are living in a matrix have some pretty convincing arguments. So more to consider.
So that's one theory, and then some of these the ways that we visit this other realm, whatever you want to call it. I mean, like you said, dreams, and then out of body experiences. So there's theories that maybe dreams and out of body experiences are kind of the same thing. But what is it? How do you describe an out of body experience? Is that different than near death experience?
Well, a near death experience often incorporates an out of body experience, but not always. And so an out of body experience is when you have the experience of having left your body, and you can oftentimes see your body, and you can travel around and do all kinds of stuff. There's, this is we're out here in kind of difficult to prove scenarios, but there's some evidence that people have claimed to have left their body and gone places where they've been able to see things that existed, which they couldn't have seen, except that they went there in spirit. They weren't there in body, sometimes much, much farther away. So again, there's something going on there. What that phenomenon is, I don't know, but it's a mystery. And again, it's more evidence that this ultimate reality is a fact and not just a fiction.
What is this thing? I just noticed this part of the book where there was Stafford Betty. Is that her name? She said there was Alzheimer's patients who were able to speak rationally just before they died, having never, having been, mute or having problems for years, being able to be rational. Then right before they die, all of a sudden, it's almost like they're cured of Alzheimer's.
Well, so interestingly, a lot of people, when they have a near-death experience, they say they have this period of clarity, which is everything becomes so clear and so real. And I mean, in all the books and all the reports from near-death experiences, many, many people have claimed that the near-death experience itself is more real than the reality we live in. And I found that to be quite interesting, that it's kind of a thread that goes through so many of these reports. Well, then we come back to, this near-death experience where the person's on the deathbed, death is imminent. They haven't been able to talk or communicate or recognize people for years, but they have this period of lucidity right before they pass, where they're able to not only talk and identify, but carry on a conversation, which they've been in a vegetative state, conscious, awake, but unable to speak or recognize people. And that occurs right there, right on the bed before they die. And there's case after case of that occurring.
And
so,
and this
again,
was this was a unique case too, talking about near-death experiences. This guy was a cardiologist, Dr. Michael Sandbaum, and the case of Pam Reynolds. She had blood drained from her head. Her body temperature was lowered to 60 degrees, and she had the classic near-death experience. She had the tunnel, the bright light, she saw distant relatives, but it was a unique case because the doctor confirmed there was no way that brain activity was possible. Because that's what they always say, that, oh, your brain is hallucinating, all these things. But the doctor's saying there's no way that the brain was working. We drained her head of blood and she was at 60 degrees. She was not alive.
Yeah. No, I know. And that's,
so how do they explain that?
well, they basically deny it.
Okay.
They say, okay, that's basically what they do. They're in denial.
But this guy's a cardiologist, and he's saying there's no way that the brain could have been working.
Yeah, no, I know. But then there's another cardiologist down the street that doesn't have tenure yet, and he's arguing him. But some of the things that's so interesting to me in the near-death experiences that are reported is some people have come out of the near-death experience and they've said that they visited deceased relatives and so on. But in some cases, not a lot. But again, you only need to find one that's real, right? I mean, that was what William James said, to find out that not all crows are black. You just need to find one white crow. You don't have to find a whole bunch of them. But in this one case that I'm thinking of that's in the book, people came back from this near-death experience and said, they saw so-and-so who had died, but the person that had the near-death experience didn't know they had died. But now they see them in their near-death experience. So they had died, but they didn't know that. So they couldn't make this up. This is a person.
How would they not know?
Well, because the person just died.
That's interesting timing then. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this. So they're seeing somebody that they said, well, so and so was there, and but how could that be? And then somebody said, but he did. He died yesterday or something. So there's those. Wow. They're cited. They're in the book. And again, it's like, I don't know if you can draw any for sure conclusions, but it warrants further investigation for sure.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about the near-death experiences to me is that a common theme, obviously besides the white light and seeing relatives, is that people didn't want to come back. Like, they're angry when they are resuscitated. They're like, no, I want to go back to that near-death experience.
Yeah.
Like whatever. So that makes you kind of not afraid of death so much that, and again, that could be the brain releasing some chemical that's making you feel high or hallucinate or whatever. I mean, that's the other theory behind it, right?
Right. I mean, that's what the materialists would argue, is that it's this brain, gasping for oxygen and coming up with all these hallucinations. But these are not hallucinations. These are seeming more real than real. Now, doesn't sound like a hallucination to me. So again, it warrants more consideration and more investigation. But all I'm doing is pointing out that the answer that we've been given, that it's just the brain doing this and that, doesn't really square with the work on the guy that had 124 IQ and no brain. I mean, what was his brain doing?
Yeah. Or the lady whose brain was, drained of all the blood. And so.
Yeah, there's another example. So
then chapter 7, the continuation of consciousness, Transcendence, that's temporarily entering this alternate realm. And then there's that theory. And then the immortality that is that you go to this other realm for eternity. But eternity is kind of outside the idea of space and time. Like, there's no beginning and end, right? So that kind of messes with your head, just trying to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. But the thing is, it really kind of, in a way, there's a lot of things about that agree with these experiences in a near-death experience, because it seems to me that one could make the argument that in a near-death experience, your consciousness goes into this other realm. Your body stays here, you're still connected, but the consciousness is there. And why do I suggest that? Because some of these people will see their whole life in an instant pass before their eyes in their near-death experience, and they will say things like, time and space don't exist where I was. That's reported by the people who've had these near-death experiences. So it's hard to get your mind around it. It's very impossible.
Yeah, what is that? When you see, I have heard that before. I've heard that term where it's like your life flashes before your eyes. How do you see your entire life in 1 second or whatever it is? Like, how is that even possible?
Because it's outside of time. And it's kind of like this. There's
So do you remember things that maybe you thought you'd forgotten and then all these memories come back to you? Because I'm guessing there's a lot of things in my life that I don't remember, but then all of a sudden do you remember everything?
well, that's what they're telling us. That's the
Huh.
people that have come back. But it's kind of like, and I'm looking at this for the second book. I'm looking at the perception of time. I've got a lot of research done on it. It's still a very, very complicated area. But they've measured time with lucid dreamers, and they found that the times reported by lucid dreamers are pretty consistent with the objective time that we live in, because they'll have them do like push-ups or sit-ups or something, and they'll time somebody outside in the real world doing it, and somebody that's flipping their eye, they're winking to signal they're in a lucid dream and doing the same thing, and the time's not really that far off. But there's a lot of reports of people that weren't having lucid dreams, but had dreams in which, eons passed, and there was, it was maybe a second or two.
Isn't that kind of like that when people take that drug, the DMT? It's kind of a similar kind of thing. You take this DMT and they're on DMT for 10 minutes or something, but when they come out of it, they think they were gone for years.
Yeah, that's it.
Kinda
Exactly.
scary.
Because again, perhaps their consciousness with the DMT, perhaps their consciousness has crossed that threshold to the ultimate reality that's behind the doors of perception.
And as another way to get into there's other ways to maybe kind of explore this other realm, like besides drugs and dreams, meditation and hypnosis. Are those kind of ways that you can maybe touch some of that?
Well, I know that you studied hypnosis. You
A little
took
bit, yeah.
yeah, a little bit. So you're aware of some of it. I'm kind of leery about accepting reports from people that have been, reporting prior lives after they've been put under hypnosis. I'm not discounting it 100%, but I just put it over there as something to think about. But meditation, for sure, from what I've read, people that have done the deep meditation, who have really crossed that threshold of consciousness and have reported back many of the same things that are reported in near-death experiences.
Really? And like with the
also
drugs too, then, like you would think that you
Yeah.
could get to that meditative state by meditating. It would be almost like you're on drugs or having dreams or near death experience.
Yeah, it would take you to that ultimate reality. But
Wow.
one thing I want to mention that's from that last chapter is Dr. Moody's psychomanium.
Oh yeah. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, he was my professor in my master's class, and he got the idea for this psychomanium by going to Greece, and he found that doing a lot of research in Greece, he found that they'd gone to this place where they contacted the dead, and he saw this big vat, and he thought perhaps they had filled it with water and were using it as a reflectory. So he came back and he constructed what he calls a psychomanium, which is a small room with a mirror in front of you. Maybe the room's 12 feet long, and there's a small mirror in front of you, tilted upward so you can't see your reflection, and a dim light behind the chair. And then you're prepped before you go in there to think about the person who's passed away that you want to contact. And you show a lot of pictures, you review a lot of stuff. And so you kind of get this person firmly in your mind. And then you go into this room, and it's been reproduced in several different universities. So I think there's something there. But these people that have experienced it in the most significant way have said that the person, all of a sudden a cloud forms in the mirror, and this person's, his appearance, they can see it clearly and they can communicate with this person. And in some cases, and I give this in the book, and you can also read Dr. Moody's book, Reunions, which is a more detailed explanation of it. But in some of these cases, the apparition that's in the mirror actually comes out of the mirror and is in the room. And there's been these investigations by Dr. Dean Radin, who's put mechanical devices and sensors and stuff in the room to try and see if they can pick that up. And they haven't had a lot of success with that, but there's been something that's been detected. So, more work needs to be done. But that's something, when you get a report from medical doctors, psychiatrists who were in the room and they had this experience, that it's not something to be taken lightly. And Carl Jung called it, these kind of apparitions, projections of the psyche. But in a later edition of his book, he said, no, I don't think it is that. I think there's something real there.
So is this like ghosts then? Like how do you explain ghosts and Ouija boards? Is this contacting people from the other realm? Like, is that the other realm communicating with us, or is this dead spirits, or what? I mean, how do you define this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly deserving of another book. But somebody else will have to write that one. No, it's there's a lot written on it, and there's a lot of information. But like William James said, he said, I've got an open mind on this, but there's got to be a lot more proof before I buy it. That's kind of where I'm coming from. I don't really feel I need to know whether that's true or not, but it's an interesting fact I put over to decide whether or not it's bears.
So do you
Needs to
think,
be further research.
like exorcisms and like demon possession, is that faked, or is that a case of a dissociative identity disorder, or is that a case of this other realm or this other
I'm
reality?
not an expert in those areas, but I'd say that you hit on it. I think you could probably find some connection to dissociative identity disorder and exorcisms that make some sense. I really do. I think the possibility of that needs to be explored.
But also,
but there's just
but isn't dissociative identity disorder, that may be a connection to that other realm as well? So maybe it's kind of it's all right then.
well, so you get into a guy named Bernardo Castro has written a lot of books, and he's a very smart guy. He's got a doctorate in computer science and a doctorate in philosophy, so he's worthy to investigate. But he thinks there's one consciousness, a universal consciousness, and we all participate in that to some degree. So what's going on with the dissociative identity disorder is there's two manifestations of the same consciousness of a consciousness in one body. So I'm supposed to have one consciousness, one manifestation of this universal consciousness, and you're supposed to have one. Somehow things get screwed up, and now I've got two manifestations in my body. So I don't know, but there's
That's
a lot
interesting.
of that makes sense.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. So then, if there is this ultimate reality, and again, you don't say you know what it is, you don't know what religion, if it's a religious thing or if it's a scientific thing, or quantum physics. I mean, it could be all these different theories, but you don't talk about like the religion role of it in terms of like heaven and hell. Like that concept is not even discussed in your book. So do you believe if there is an ultimate reality, is there different realms of it? Is there like a happy ultimate reality and a sad ultimate reality, or is it all just one place?
I feel like, Occam's razor is, don't multiply things beyond necessity. I think there's one ultimate reality. You don't need to go to multiverses and all that. Some physicists have argued that everything can be explained if you think of multiple universes. That's complicating it beyond what needs to be done. But I think there's one ultimate reality, and I think people that do, horrible things, they may not be aware of those things, but when they become aware of them, and when they're in the ultimate reality and they relive those and perceive the effect that those actions had on people in the objective reality, when they feel the pains, then that's their own personal hell that they have to go through. I think there's some argument that could be made for that.
And do you think that's an eternity thing, or do you think that they
there's no time. I mentioned in the book, I said, what does eternity mean if we're beyond space and time? So I don't know.
That's kind of scary. So be a good person is what the lesson is there.
There's one important thing out of the Bible. There's a lot of good things in the Bible, but there's one that I think everybody should at least try to live up to. And that is the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And if you do that, you can't be too far wrong.
And so is that kind of the point of like, what is, after all this, research that you've done and you've lived a very full life, like what is the point? What is the meaning of life? Like, how should we spend our days on earth? I mean, if it sounds like the near-death experience people saying, hey, death is great. Like, so, but then we still have this time on earth. So then why are we here? What's the point?
Well, we're here, I think, to learn how to love. I think everybody that's come back from these experiences, whether they've been near-death experiences or on drugs, and I point this out in the book, they come back and they say, the most important thing is love. And so if you learn to love, if you can really learn to love, and you can have the good fortune to experience love, I think that's the reason you're here, and you'll take that with you.
Romantic love or family love or friend love, or?
I don't think there's a discrimination. I think love is love.
Or love of like if I love podcasting, is that like love of something you do, or all that?
I think love of other living organisms and respect for life. of other living things. If you treat not only every person you meet as you'd like to be treated, but if you treat every living thing as you'd like to be treated, were you that living thing? I think you can't go too far wrong.
Well,
and I talk about that. We talk about that in the consciousness of plants.
Yeah. So
that.
If that's true, then I shouldn't even be eating salads because I might be.
Well, I think some of the plants, that's their goal. That's their objective on Earth. I don't think it is necessarily with animals, but I think with plants, their goal is to feed the living things that are, making their way around the Earth. I think they're, but I think to do it with reverence, that you should be thinking of you don't start stuff on fire and burn stuff just willy-nilly. You think you do it with reverence. That's basically the message that comes from some of these Eastern religions, which I think has some validity.
Okay. And then, so this is another concept that you didn't talk about in the book, but I know you've studied this. What is the role with aliens with all this? Do you believe in aliens? Are aliens play a part? Are aliens in space? Are they in the inner Earth? Are they just in that other realm where they travel through the different dimensions? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I've read a lot because, again, being curious.
Yeah.
And I love it when people come out and say there's absolutely no aliens, there's no alien life, there's no UFOs, don't exist. I just love that because I know that whenever somebody's so adamant about something that they can't prove, that means there's something interesting there. You got to find out what that interesting thing is.
Well, because Elon Musk, who's the guy who's going to, build this big space station and go to Mars and all this, but he doesn't even think that there's aliens. He thinks there's a very high probability that there isn't. Because if there is, we would have seen him by now.
Hey, he's the guy that's buying Bitcoin. So what does that say? He had to stick to making his cars. But, well, the thing is, I do think that Jacques Vallée, who was the French guy that they imaged when they made Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg used the role model of Jacques Vallée for the French guy that was in that movie. And Jacques Vallée is a brilliant guy. And he thinks it's a physical and a psychic thing. And I think Carl Jung had the same, he actually wrote a paper on it, Carl Jung, and he had the same idea. And I think that's true with all of us. So we're going to find that there's an ability to transfer back and forth between this ultimate realm and the objective world we live in. And there's so much evidence for the physical manifestation. I mean, Commander Fravor, the Navy pilot who tracked the Tic Tac, UFO, traveling at thousands of miles an hour, physically impossible to do with the technology we have, just tells you there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but it would make sense that it would have something to do with this ultimate reality where time and space don't exist. That's my theory.
Wow. Well, that'd be cool to see that. And I guess we're all going to find out someday because we're all going to die. And so we're going to find out what the answer is at that point, right? I mean, I'm assuming you learn at that point.
Yeah, you hope that. But the other thing is it could be just nothing.
You could just die and then that's it. It's just like go to black, like fade to black, like before you were born. What were you doing before you were born? You don't remember that. It was just.
Well, that's what Schopenhauer, it's one of the quotes in the book, when somebody said, what happens when you die? He said, you just go back to where you were before you were born. That kind of shuts him up. So I don't know.
Right. But that could be that ultimate reality, or it could just be nothingness, which is kind of scary if you think about it.
Yeah. Well, nothingness is not painful.
That's true. So at least you're not suffering. So
people talk about that. And when they use that as an example, they say, what's the best sleep you ever had? And it's the dreamless sleep. The most enjoyable sleep is the dreamless sleep. So if it's that, but I kind of, you have to, Carl Jung made a comment in his dreams, in his biography. And he said, everybody should have a myth about what happens after death. And so I have a myth and I'm not subscribing to it and trying to convince anybody, but I think could be a state of existence where it's like a lucid dream, where you construct the world that you're living in. And, maybe that's why these people that have near-death experiences don't want to come back, because they've constructed a world that they think is really wonderful. So,
that'd be amazing. It'd be amazing to be able to create your dream in on Earth. That'd be kind of fun too, if you could.
Yeah, really, I read a lot about suffering, and except for the fact that people have real cause for suffering when they have no place to live and they don't have enough food and they don't have adequate medical care. Most of the suffering is mental. And if you can change if you can use your imagination and change your outlook, you can create the world you want to live in. I've told one client of ours who was always worried about everything he was seeing on the news, he just hated the period of time he's living in. He's in his 80s. And I said, well, all you have to do is buy a 1950s car and watch Turner Classic Movies on TV and don't pay attention to the news. And you're living in the 50s. And just forget it, because you can create the world you want to live in.
That's a good point. All right. Well, this stuff is fascinating. We should probably wrap up, though. I do like to end with a charity. I think you mentioned Baby Corner. Can you explain to the audience?
Eastside Baby Corner in Issaquah is our charity. And, they do wonderful things for children, and it's all volunteers, and anything anybody can.
And people donate not just diapers, but like strollers and toys. And I mean, they just have last time I went, it was a giant, almost like a warehouse of things. And people can come and just say, hey, I need this. And then they just go and find it in their warehouse.
They got to go through a provider. So they've been qualified. People can't come in there. But people donate money to the organization so they can buy diapers and formula for kids. And it's a really worthwhile charity.
That's great. And then what are your follow-up plans? Are you going to be doing another book or like a totally different subject, or more into this deep dive into this subject? Or
Well, so the research I'm doing now is on time perception. As I mentioned, it's really, there's so much more to that than I'd ever envisioned. So whether that will be an addendum to the book, a second edition or a separate book, I'm not sure at this point, but I'm just enjoying the research. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah, you've done a lot. Like we said, 496 citations in this book. So it's not just your opinion or something you crafted out of thin air. You've done the research on this book for sure. So
yeah, I know what I'm trying to do is open everybody's mind, not convince them of anything in particular, but just to have them consider that there are some alternatives to the materialistic paradigm.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks,
I'll see you for dinner in a couple of days or a week or so.
Yeah, this has been good rehearsal. When I get that call from Oprah.
Yeah, or Joe Rogan. I think you should go on Rogan.
Joe Rogan.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
So there you have it. You may have had some questions answered, or you may have more questions to ask now. But get the book, read it all the way through. We really just scratched the surface with a lot of this stuff, and really check the sources on the book. Again, it's 496 sources. And these are very well-respected people that he's referencing, some of the most brilliant minds of our times. And I truly think my dad is a brilliant mind, and I love having these deep discussions with him, and I'm glad we were able to record this. And he may be writing more books, but make sure in the meantime to buy the book on Amazon, give him a good review, and that will help him out a lot. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, shoot for the moon.